Today is June the 4th in the year 2009, and we are in the Dharma Cloud Temple, Upper Hamlet, during our 21-day retreat, the path of the Buddha. Yesterday we spoke about the Four Noble Truths as the Buddha's strategy to handle ill-being, to handle suffering. And the Buddha always repeats that what he teaches is only about suffering and the relief of suffering. You should not forget the later half of the sentence. He does not just teach about suffering, he teaches the transformation, the relief of suffering. And you have to understand the Four Noble Truths in that light. Because the Four Noble Truths are not only about suffering, it is about something else. And we know that the first truth is ill-being, the presence of ill-being, which means suffering, khổ. Ill-being as a reality, as something that is there, you have to accept. Suffering is a reality. If you don't accept that truth, you cannot go further. And everyone knows that suffering is inside and around. So you agree with the Buddha that ill-being is there. And right away we see the second noble truth, which is the making of ill-being. If ill-being is there, there must be a cause. So if we accept the first truth, we have to accept the second. It is the making of ill-being. The making of ill-being. Khổ tập. The making of ill-being. Because we know that everything has a cause. Everything has its roots. So the second truth is about the cause, it's about the root, about the making. We must have lived in such a way that suffering has become a reality. Suppose you have a depression. Depression is ill-being. And you must have lived in such a way that a depression has become a reality. So depression is the first truth, and the way of living that has brought it to you, that is the second truth. And you have to accept that as a truth. And the third noble truth is the affirmation that ill-being can be transformed. It is a positive thing. It is good news that it is possible to transform ill-being. And that in the old language is the cessation of ill-being. Khổ tập diệt. The cessation of the making of ill-being. There is a hope. There is a certainty. Because there are those of us who are able to transform their ill-being, their suffering. There are those of us who have overcome their depression. So that is also a truth that you have to accept. And that would lead to necessarily to the fourth truth. Because there must be a way, there must be a cause, so that the cessation of ill-being be possible. Otherwise, how could it be possible to stop suffering and to enjoy well-being? So it's very logical to mention the fourth noble truth, which is the path leading to the cessation of ill-being. The path leading to the cessation of ill-being. Khổ tập diệt đạo. The path leading to the cessation of the cause of ill-being. You remove the cause and the fruit is no longer there. You have to remove the cause. You cannot remove the effect. You have to remove the cause. So depression is the same. If you take some medicine in order to feel a little bit better, that is not to deal with the cause of the depression. You have to see the cause of your depression. You have to see the way of life that has brought depression to you and deal with the cause. So the cessation here is the cessation of the cause. Cessation of the cause of ill-being. And that is the old kind of language. But we, in the 21st century, we can use another language. And young Dharma teacher may be interested in using this kind of language because the cessation of ill-being means the beginning, the presence of well-being. So the third noble truth can be described the presence of well-being. The Buddha said, when darkness is no longer there, light is there. So the absence of darkness means the presence of light. Vô minh diệt minh sinh. And he has repeated that several times. The absence of darkness means the presence of light. So the absence of ill-being means the presence of well-being. It's so logical. And that is why the Four Noble Truths is not only about suffering, it is about happiness. And the third Noble Truth is about happiness. The Buddha teaches about suffering, but he teaches about happiness. And the opposite of khổ, suffering, is lạc, hạnh phúc. So we can say that the teaching of the Buddha is about happiness. Maybe in the first two Noble Truths, talking about ill-being, unhappiness, suffering, but in the second Noble Truth, the third and fourth Noble Truth, he speaks about the possibility of happiness, of being happy, and the way of life, the path that can lead to happiness. The path leading to the cessation of ill-being means the path leading to the presence of well-being. It's the same. So the fourth Noble Truth is the path leading to happiness. To well-being. Lạc đạo. The path of happiness, the path leading to happiness. So if you want to talk to the young people, the teenagers about the Four Noble Truths, you might like to use the new kind of language so that they can receive it more easily. There's a path that leads to happiness, and we should learn that path. The second Noble Truth can also be conceived as a path. But it is not a path that leads to happiness. It is not a path leading to well-being. It is a path leading to suffering. And many of us have taken that path. So it is possible for us to speak about the second Noble Truth in terms of path also. The path leading to ill-being. And of course the first one is ill-being. The first sharing offered by the Buddha about his insight is about the Four Noble Truths. After enlightenment, he stayed a number of days to enjoy his enlightenment. And then he started going north in order to seek for his 5 friends and share his insight. He walked to the deer park He walked to Varanasi because someone informed him that his co-practitioners have gone to that place. So he wanted to go and help them first. So he wanted to share his insight with his friends, his co-practitioners first. And the first sharing is about the Four Noble Truths. And of course, the fourth is about the path, the so-called the noble eightfold path. And we know that that path is made of right understanding, right view, right thinking, right speech, right action, and so on. The path of right action. And that is described as a noble path, as a noble path. Aryan, noble. But the other path is not noble. The other path is leading only to destruction, to separation, to death, to despair. That path is not a noble path. It is an ignoble path. The path of anger, the path of discrimination, the path of violence, the path of ignorance, the path of despair, the ignoble path. So we can say at least that the teaching on the Four Noble Truths is about suffering, but it's also about happiness. Happiness is possible, transformation, healing is possible. But why? Is it possible to teach about happiness alone without teaching about suffering? Why don't he speak about happiness and the path leading to happiness? Why did he have to speak about suffering and the path leading to suffering? Because underneath, he has found that happiness and suffering are. They are linked to each other. They are linked to each other. Well-being and being, they are linked to each other. And this is a very deep insight that will be revealed to his students later on. The interbeing between happiness and suffering. And if we don't see that, it is impossible for us to see the true nature of Buddhist ethic and morality. Those of us who have studied and practiced in the Plum village tradition we know that suffering plays a certain role in our practice. Each of us needs a certain amount of suffering in order to practice. And we speak about the goodness of suffering. The goodness of suffering. Suffering is sometimes useful. Suffering can teach us. And that is why suffering has something to do with happiness. And this is the beginning of a kind of insight. And we see the non-dualistic way of thinking in Buddhism, which is very important. When you come to Plum village in the month of June or July, you see lotus flowers blooming. And you know very well that you cannot plant the lotus on marble. You have to plant them in the mud. If there is no mud, there is no lotus. So if you want to have lotus flowers, you have to get some mud. And if you look deeply into the nature of lotus, you see mud in it. You don't need to look at the mud, you need to look at the lotus, and you see the mud in the lotus. You cannot remove the mud from the lotus. If you do, the lotus ceases to be a lotus. Lotus is made of mud. Happiness is made of suffering. It's hard in the beginning to understand, but that is the truth. There is a discipline in philosophy called meta-ethics. Siêu đạo đức học. Deal with this problem. Deal with the ontological ground of morality, the ontological ground, epistemological ground of morality and ethics. It is a recent trend of discipline, but it's very important. And if we want to speak about a code of right behavior, a code of right conduct offered by the Buddhist tradition, we should pay attention to the foundation of the teaching. And you should understand the nature of interbeing, of everything. You should understand the nature of emptiness. No self, interbeing, signlessness, in order to really understand the Buddha's teaching on the Four Noble Truths. And in one 21-day retreat, we have the time and the opportunity to do so. Suffering has something to do with happiness. And there are those of us who ask why suffering, ill being, as a truth can be called noble. The Four Noble Truths. What is so noble about suffering? What is so noble about ill-being? Ill-being should not be noble. Suffering should not be noble. Only happiness should be noble. The fact is that if you don't understand suffering, you don't understand happiness either. You cannot understand happiness either. If you don't have the mud, you can never make the lotus. And therefore, you have to study ill-being and suffering in such a way that can make us, that can help us truly understand the nature of happiness and the path leading to happiness. We usually say that the kingdom of God is a place, we usually think of the kingdom of God or the pure land of the Buddha is a place where there is no suffering. It's only pure happiness, pure bliss, there is no suffering. We don't want to accept that in the kingdom of God there is suffering. If there is suffering, that is cannot be called the kingdom of God. And there are those Buddhists who also think in that way, that in the pure land of the Buddha, there should not be any kind of suffering, only bliss, only sukha, no dukkha. But the fact is that if we define happiness as the capacity to understand and to love, because without understanding and love, no happiness could be possible. You want to go to the kingdom because there is understanding and love. Down here, we don't have enough understanding and love. That is why we suffer so much. And what we are thirsty of is understanding and love. We complain that no one understands us, no one loves us. If people understand us and love us, why do we have to go somewhere else? So we are looking for a place where there is understanding and love. It means happiness. The elements, the substance that make happiness is understanding and love. And we define the kingdom of God is a place where there is understanding and love. Plenty of it. But if we practice looking deeply, and looking deeply is meditation. If we practice looking deeply, we see that without understanding, without being in touch with suffering, without understanding suffering, you cannot love. Compassion, love are born from understanding. How can you love unless you understand? How the father could love his son if he does not understand the suffering, the difficulties of his son? How a husband can love and make his wife happy if he does not know anything about the suffering and difficulties of his wife? So if you want to love and make someone happy, you should ask yourself question, do I understand him enough? Do I understand her enough? And you may like to go to her and ask, darling, do you think I understand you enough? And she will tell you, you have not understood her enough. That's sure. And she can help you. Darling, because I want to love you and make you happy, I want to understand you. And first of all, your difficulties, your suffering, now and during your childhood. Please tell me, help me. Because I know very well that if I don't understand you, I will make a lot of mistakes. That is the language of love. So understanding is, first of all, understanding suffering. Difficulties, sufferings, blockage. You understand the despair. The frustration, the difficulties, the pain of the person you love. But if you have already understood your own pain, your own anguish, your own despair, it will be much easier to understand the anguish, the despair, and the pain of the other person. Because ill-being is inside and around. If we understand the nature of ill-being inside, it will be much easier to understand the nature of ill-being around us. So the Four Noble Truths should be addressed to oneself and to the world, not only to the world, to oneself. Self-understanding is very important for the understanding of the other person. And understanding here, first, is understanding ill-being, understanding suffering. And in the tradition, there are those like Avalokiteshvara. They know how to listen. They know how to observe. They know how to look. That is why they can understand. And when you understand the suffering of someone, you can relieve a lot of her suffering, his suffering. Because every one of us is hungry of understanding. Many of us complain that we have never been understood. Nobody has understood us. So cultivate understanding in order to understand the people around us. That is a basic practice. And understanding is first understanding of ill-being, the meditation on the first noble truth. Many of us are afraid of ill-being, are afraid of suffering. And the natural tendency is to try to run away from ill-being. from suffering. And that is why you have no chance. And in the Buddhist teaching, you are advised to stay with your suffering, to hold your suffering, your ill-being dearly, and to have a deep look on it. The practice of the first and the second noble truth. And if you don't understand the nature of ill-being, if you have not seen the path leading to suffering, you cannot see the path, you cannot see the hope of having well-being and the path leading to well-being. That is why meditation on the first two truths will lead to the understanding, to the attainment of the third and the fourth truth. That is why it is impossible for Buddha to speak about happiness alone and not to talk about suffering. And it is true also that it is impossible for the Buddha to speak about suffering alone without speaking about happiness. Because suffering and happiness, they are like the mud and the lotus, one making the other. We can learn a lot from suffering. We have to get in touch with suffering. We have to look deeply into the nature of suffering, and that will bring out, that will help us cultivate understanding and compassion. Without that, we cannot be a happy person. Without that, we cannot make the happiness of another person. And therefore, understanding suffering is very important. That is why in Plum village we speak about the goodness of suffering. If we have suffered, that's good. And we have the materials in order to learn, to inquire about the possibility of happiness, of being happy.